In this graph, we're going to look at another of the key characteristics in quantifying muscular performance, and that is muscular power generation. And power can actually be characterized in two different ways. One, we can calculate it by multiplying the force generated times velocity, and we'll see that's what we have in our graph here in a moment. But it's also equal to the work performed per unit time. I actually like that definition sometimes because it's basically like saying, if you recall, work equals force times distance. We saw that in a previous graph, right? So the larger the force generated, the longer the distance that we move that particular load, the greater the work done. Now, high power also involves time here, right? And so if we do move a large load over a great distance in a short period of time, then we get very significant power generation, right? But let's come back to our graph here and look at our velocity on the y-axis and force on our x-axis. Again, one times the other is going to equal power. Let's trace in blue here. What we find is that when force is very low or near zero, we can move it at very high velocity, right? If the load is very small, we can move it very quickly. But of course, power is going to be very low because we're multiplying by a very small force. Now, on the other end of the scale, if our force generated is very high, sometimes you're trying to move something very heavy, but if we can't actually move it at all, if our velocity is zero, once again, you will see that power will equal zero, again, because one of our two parameters in our equation here is equal to zero. So what that tells us is that maximal power is going to be generated in between, right? When velocity of shortening or movement of the load is moderate, but we're moving a fairly large load, right? Our force generation is high. That's going to give us our peak power, which is going to be measured in either watts or horsepower.